The mansion on Rosewood Hill wore the storm like a shawl. Rain threaded down its stone shoulders, collecting in silver beads along the balustrades, dripping from the mouths of carved cherubs who seemed, in the flicker of lightning, to be whispering secrets to the hedge labyrinth below. Inside, the hallways held their breath. Rugs swallowed footsteps. Portraits watched. Amara Williams moved through the quiet like a note of warmth in a cold room. She had learned the language of houses, how to tell by the scent of polish and the color of dust where neglect lived, how to hear the difference between wood settling and boards protesting. She knew which windows sighed, which doors pinched shut, and which towels would wrinkle if you folded them while you were thinking of something else. She had learned this kind of attention from her mother, Evelyn, a seamstress who stitched hymns into hems and left small mercies inside pockets, a peppermint, a prayer. Amara was 35, a year past her mother's funeral, and still carrying grief like an iron sewing machine in her chest. Heirloom heavy, useful for making a life, impossible to lift alone. The job at the Whitmore estate had come, when she most needed a room that was not full of absence. The pay was good, the expectations clear. Keep the rooms in order. Keep out of the rooms that kept their own counsel. Address Mr. Whitmore as Sir, and do not bring the outside in. Charles Whitmore ate at a long table meant for grander appetites. He walked with the slight tilt forward of a man who had leaned on ambition most of his life and now found ambition had made a Cain of him. He kept his voice low, his shirts starched, and his feelings stored like vintage wine, rarely uncorked, and only in company that would not waste them. His wife, Elizabeth, had been dead 5 years. The papers had called it an accident. The staff called it a tragedy and then called their children to dinner. On that Thursday, the storm began just before noon. A slow drumming on the glass, then a sharper cadence. Amara wheeled her cart into the master library and felt the room rise to meet her. She loved the library with a loyalty she did not extend to any other part of the house. Books wore a house, differently. They softened it, made its edges thoughtful. The air smelled like leather and binding glue, citrus oil, and a secret waited too long to be told. She started at the far shelves and worked toward the fireplace, where a brass fender gleamed like a question asked only once. She dusted the spines, with the gentleness of a friend touching a bruise. When she came to the oak cabinet, she knelt and opened the bottom drawer. Ledgers, theater programs, a wedding invitation typed in a font that had fallen out of fashion. Something stiff caught against her cloth. She reached behind the drawer where the wood framed its emptiness and found, tucked into the seam, a photograph. It was not much to look at. Faded, the edges mouse-bit, a crease running diagonally like a bad memory. But the faces came up through time as if the paper had not been asked to hold them so long. 2 women stood on a lawn dappled with late afternoon light. One wore a pale dress and the expression of someone seeing a joke in the distance. The other had her hair tied in a scarf and her mouth poised halfway to saying the name of the person, behind the camera. The pale dress belonged to Elizabeth Whitmore. Amara had seen enough of her portraits to know. The scarf belonged to Evelyn. Amara's breath left as if the room had leaned and poured it out. She sat back on her heels, the fringe of the rug combing her shins, and stared. It took a long time for the storm to sound like rain again, and not the rush of her own blood. "Mama," she whispered, as if the name might bend the air and make the woman in the picture turn her head. "What were you doing here?" Evelyn had never spoken of the Whitmores. She had spoken of thread, how it behaved, how it lied, and of faith, which she treated as a kind of strong fabric, not always pretty, but useful. She had spoken of the day Amara was born, and the day Amara would leave home, and the days in between when they would make soup and do laundry and wait for the sewing machine to cool. She had spoken of the men who were promises with shoes on. Easy to walk away, she'd say, and laugh. And she had spoken of no man at all. She had never shown Amara this lawn. Amara wiped her hands, as if truth had a stain she could remove, and slipped the photograph into the pocket of her apron. She finished the room without remembering how, and carried the storm with her through the house. That evening she lay on her narrow bed in the staff quarters, a brass lamp pressing a circle of light onto the photograph. Evelyn's scarf was patterned with tiny flowers Amara had seen once in a fabric store bolt, blue forget-me-nots on cream. Elizabeth's hand hovered near Evelyn's elbow, that intimate vicinity of a person who knows where the other person keeps her hurt. In the background, just at the edge of the frame, a portion of the mansion's east terrace was visible, the balustrade with ivy that had been scolded back into obedience long ago. "How?" Amara asked the quiet. "How did you two know each other?" Sleep took her as suddenly as a wave. In the dream that came, she was in a room stitched shut by rain, and her mother was there, humming and picking a thread from the air. "You always do this," Evelyn said, smiling. "Find the end, and pull." When Amara reached for her, the room rotated like a carousel, and she woke with her palm on the photograph and the taste of unanswered in her throat. The next morning, she carried the question into the day. Mr. Whitmore was at breakfast, the paper, tented in his hands, coffee steam making a private weather in front of his face. A clock ticked with the brisk certainty of someone who had never been late. "Sir," Amara said, setting the bowl of berries with careful hands, "I found a photograph while cleaning the library. It shows your late wife with my mother." The paper lowered 1 inch. A pair of pale eyes scanned her face, then retreated, like a shoreline teasing a tide. "Your mother?" "Evelyn Williams," Amara said. "You might have known her as Evelyn Carter, before me." The paper lowered another inch. Charles Whitmore's gaze sharpened, cutting the distance between them into precise inches. "You must be mistaken," he said. "Elizabeth knew many people." "I know my mother's face," Amara said. The steadiness of her voice surprised her. "I grew up inside it." Silence moved across the room like a cloud. He folded the paper as if it were a small animal he didn't want to startle and set it aside. "Miss Williams," he said finally, the "miss" a formality that put her back 3 steps. "There are drawers in that library that have not been opened in a decade. If you find things, you would do better to return them to their rest." "Is there some reason," she asked, gentle and relentless, "that my mother's photograph would be hidden there?" His jaw worked, a muscle ticking like a moth behind glass. "We all lose things we don't intend to find again," he said. "That doesn't mean we should go looking." She wanted to say, "It's not lost if the person who needs it finds it." She wanted to say, "My mother is dead, and my questions have no other mouth to climb into." She wanted to say many things, but he had already lifted the cup and turned toward the window where rain rehearsed its lines against the glass. The conversation closed like a book whose spine had never wanted to be bent. Amara left with the photograph in her pocket and a determination that swung in her like a lantern. Houses keep secrets the way trees keep rings. You don't see them until you cut. Amara began to listen differently, to the hush at the top of the grand staircase where drafts met and traded gossip, to the thrill of the dumbwaiter cables when they thought no one was listening, to the way Mrs. Green, the senior maid, said Mrs. Whitmore, with a softness that made the name a prayer. "Mrs. Green," Amara said, catching her in the pantry, where sugar kept its company in labeled jars. "Did you know my mother?" Mrs. Green's hands, steady enough to whisk a meringue while her husband was being told he had 6 months to live, stilled over the list she was writing. She did not look up. "Child, there are rooms you don't want to go into, not with the light, not with a candle." "I'm already in them," Amara said. "I just don't know where the door is." Mrs. Green sighed and turned, and her gaze came to rest on Amara with a kindness that hurt. Your mother was a fine woman. That much I'll say where anyone can hear it. She came to this house long before you were born, when Mrs. Whitmore was still learning how to wear her last name. There was music in those days, and laughter that wasn't hired. What did she do here? Amara asked. Was she a seamstress? Did she work for the family? She worked for her own heart, Mrs. Green said quietly. They both did. It took a moment for the meaning to arrange itself into a shape Amara could recognize. They loved each other, she said, the words more breath than voice. Mrs. Green folded the list and slipped it into her apron, a small ceremony of ending. Some people never forgive the world for making them hide what they love, and some people never forgive the people doing the loving. Mr. Whitmore, Amara said. Mrs. Green's eyes flicked to the doorway and back. Careful, child, she murmured. Some ghosts still have keys. That night the storm paused to catch its breath and left the house wrapped in a hush that hummed. Amara returned to the library with a pocket full of nerve and a cloth that smelled faintly of lemons. She moved to the vanity in Elizabeth's suite, an antique with a triptych of mirrors that could make a single face into a choir, and slid open the small center drawer. Nothing but old perfume bottles and a silver brush whose bristles remembered. A different scalp. The side drawer stuck, then gave with a sound like a word changing its mind. At the back, a small brass key lay as if it had been put down mid-thought. The key fit the little wooden box in the armoire, the one with the inlaid leaves that had always seemed to Amara more than decoration. The lock turned with a click she felt in her bones. Inside, wrapped in tissue that had yellowed into a kind of delicate resolve, was a journal. She did not mean to read it. She meant to hold it and place it back where time had convinced itself of its territory. But the first page opened itself like a pair of hands. June 19th. The summer smells like linen drying and citrus peels left on a plate. Evelyn says if you listen to lemon zest, you can hear the ocean it came from. Today we met by the East Terrace. We did not touch, and it felt like sinning twice. Once for wanting, and once for pretending not to. Amara sat on the edge of the bed and let the entries carry her. They were not confessions so much as a record of light, where it fell, how it made a face softer, how it retreated in winter and left skin looking like testimony. There were notes about books read out loud to one another in plain rooms, about a dress altered to make dancing easier, about a picnic off the property where they pretended bees were paparazzi and laughed until a man with a dog passed and they had to become acquaintances again. 5 pages before the ribbon marked the last entry, the handwriting leaned hard and the words arrived breathless. He knows. Or he suspects. Which is the same thing drawn with a duller pencil. He thinks he is. Losing a chess match to someone he cannot see. I keep expecting his hand on my shoulder, but it is worse than that. He is gentle. He is gentler than he has ever been, and I feel the trap of it, the kindness meant to starve a person of the thing not offered. I told Evelyn I would leave. She kissed my forehead as if I were very brave. I am not brave. I am tired of being a door and never a room. The last entry was dated 2 weeks before the papers had called it an accident. The ink wavered in places, water or tears or both. I told him, not with my mouth, with the way I stood. It is strange how a person can build a house with someone and still not have a room that is truly theirs. He said, we can weather this, as if weather were the problem. I told him the truth is not weather. The truth is the landscape. He put his hand through his hair and looked like a boy practicing his father's anger. He will not forgive me. I do not know how to forgive myself for waiting this long to be alive. Amara closed the journal and pressed it to her chest. She felt a terrible, tender clarity. like seeing a wound after years of dressing the scar and realizing it had never actually healed. She slept with the box beneath her bed, the way a child might sleep with a talisman, and woke into a morning that cut, like glass. She told herself she would tell no one, then found herself carrying the box to the study where Charles Whitmore sat with his accounts, his pen scratching like a small animal trying to be free. He looked up at the shape of her in the doorway, took in the object in her hands, and stood. "You've been in rooms that don't belong to you," he said. His voice was calm in a way that felt like absence. "I warned you." "You warned me to let lies sit like furniture," Amara replied, surprising herself with the steadiness in her. "But my mother's life is a room I belong in. So is Mrs. Whitmore's." Something moved across his face, resentment dressed as restraint, sorrow disguised as composure. "Give me the box," he said. "No," she said. "You've had the last word for 5 years. I need to say mine." He did not come around the desk. He placed his fingertips on the polished wood as if he could steady the earth with posture alone. "Say what you came to say." "They loved each other," Amara said, feeling the rightness of the sentence anchor itself. "And you knew." A small, tired smile that was not a smile touched his mouth. "Everyone knows what they have to," he said, "and pretends not to know what they can't afford." "She was afraid of you," Amara said, and when he flinched it made her braver. "She wrote that you were gentler, which was worse. She wrote that you would never forgive her." He shut his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet the way marble looks wet when it has been polished too long. "I loved my wife," he said, "in the way I knew how, in the way I was taught to measure love, by provision, by permanence, by what I stood between her and. I could not imagine a love that asked me to make room for someone else inside my own house." He ran a hand over the ledger as if smoothing the past. "When I understood, when I finally saw it, I felt made a fool of. A man of my station made small by something I could not compete with and could not endorse without dismantling everything I'd promised to be." "Did you hurt her?" Amara asked, the question flattening the sound in the room. He did not answer quickly enough. His gaze dropped, then lifted in tiny increments, a man carrying his eyes up a staircase. "We argued," he said, each word placed carefully. "Words have edges. We both bled. She turned to leave. Quickly, angrily, she slipped. The rug caught her foot." He swallowed. "She hit the corner of the table. There was blood. I remember thinking, absurdly, I must call someone to clean it. Then the second thought, there is no one who can fix this." The room held still. Outside, a crow called once and reconsidered. Amara felt the ground of certainty tilt beneath her and caught herself on the only beam within reach, the memory of her mother's voice. "Some truths don't keep you warm, my love, but some keep you from freezing to death in a lie." You told. "The world, it was an accident," she said. "It was," he said, and the word was not a defense so much as a gravestone, and it was not the kind that excuses the person it happened to. "You hid her journal," Amara said softly. "You hid my mother." At that, something like anger but older flickered over his face. "I never hid your mother," he said. Elizabeth hid her. Out of love, out of fear, out of wanting one piece of her life to be untouched by the rules that had touched everything. I did what men like me do. I closed ranks. I protected the name. I made a museum out of my marriage and sold tickets to grief. What did you do to my mother? The question rose from the place where children keep their oldest terrors. I did nothing, he said, and the truth of it sounded like rust. After Elizabeth's death, she came to the East Terrace at dusk. I went out to her. We stood like two strangers reading a monument. I said, "We will not speak of this again." She said, You do not own silence, Mr. Whitmore. I wanted to hate her. It would have been easier. But she looked at the house as if it were a person she was forgiving. He smiled a little, in spite of himself. I could not make a villain out of someone who grieved so well. Amara stood very still. She thought of Evelyn at the kitchen table, rolling dough into thin circles and telling it secrets as if food listened. She thought of the way her mother had held her once, the night of a fever, whispering, "We come from a line of women who learn to carry lightning and call it thread." Why didn't she tell me? Amara asked. Why didn't she ever say she had been here? That she had loved someone whose portrait hangs 15 feet high in the dining room? Perhaps she thought she was sparing you, he said. Perhaps she wanted you to love the world without having to forgive it first. The afternoon dissolved into a rain-thin light that made everything in the room seem a little further away. Amara placed the journal on the desk and turned the photograph over so that the image faced the wood. I will not let her be erased, she said. Not by your discomfort, not by her own caution, not by the way people talk when they think. They are telling the truth and are really just repeating the world. Miss Williams, he said, and there was something like plea shaped into the syllables. What do you want from me? I don't know, she said, because the honest answer to the oldest questions is always, I don't know. I want my mother back. I want Elizabeth to have had a life where no one had to be hidden. I want a house that doesn't insist the past is only what the most powerful say it is. He nodded, as if accepting terms that could not be met. Then I will give you what I can, he said. I will tell you the rest. The rest was not dramatic in the way a story might want it to be. There was no dark stare, no letter in a hidden panel, no confession written in a shaking hand. There was only a series of small moments that together formed the shape of a life. Elizabeth's laugh at a joke no one else heard, the way she held teacups with 2 fingers, delicately, as if touch were a performance. Evelyn's habit of counting, breaths when she was near anger, 1, 2, 3, 4, and letting the numbers burn off the heat like fog. There was the afternoon they painted a wall in Elizabeth's private sitting room, a color that had no name but looked like dusk, and the night they danced without music and said it was better this way because the world could not choreograph them. When Charles finished, the room felt larger, as if making space for 2 women who had been standing there all along. He lifted the journal and cradled it, his palms flattening the air above its cover. You can keep it, he said finally. I cannot be trusted with her truth. I have already proved that. Amara took the journal as one takes a child offered by someone who must admit they are not the parent. I will keep it safe, she said. Not secret, safe. Days turned like pages. The storm spent itself and left the garden rinsed and contrite. The house creaked in its customary places and learned to creak in a few new ones. Mr. Whitmore moved through his routines with a weariness that was not quite regret and not quite relief, but a cousin to both. He began once a week to take his tea in the East Terrace and sit with his hands empty. The staff noticed and did not mention it, which is a kind of blessing. Amara worked and also remembered. She would pass the portrait of Elizabeth in the hall and feel beneath the varnish the pulse of a woman who had wanted a door and become a room in someone else's house. She would fold napkins and imagine Evelyn's fingers in the same motion years ago, making order out of cloth because it was the only thing she was allowed to tame. One evening, when the light draped itself in silk over the banister and the house, looked kind, Amara took the journal to her room and opened to a page she had not read yet. In it, Elizabeth described a photograph. The one where we are both pretending we are not being watched and also hoping desperately that we are, so we won't be invisible to history. She wrote about the feeling of standing on grass that had been ordered into obedience by a gardener and wishing for a wild field, one where you could lie down and be lost. She wrote Evelyn's name the way a person writes their own. Amara turned the photograph over, Written faintly on the back in pencil were 4 words: "For when it's safe." She did not cry. She felt something else, rarer, a sense of inheritance. That was not money or furniture or a recognizable surname, but a means of living. Her mother had loved bravely in a time and place that handled such love like contraband. Elizabeth had been brave in her own, different way, which is to say she had been afraid and had moved anyway. Charles had failed them and then had not, which is sometimes what repentance looks like when you're late to it. In the weeks that followed, Amara began to leave small markers of truth where only those who needed them would notice. She placed a slender vase of forget-me-nots on the East Terrace. Table every Thursday. She switched one of the library's framed watercolors for a copy of a photograph of 2 women in a garden. No faces, just hands, one reaching, one receiving. She did not expose. She revealed. She found herself one afternoon in the city's records office, a place that smelled of cardboard and patience. She looked up permits for the Whitmore East Terrace renovation 20 years ago and found, in the shaky cursive of a contractor's note, the name of a seamstress who had been paid in cash for alterations to a set of drapes, E. Carter. She made a copy and slipped it into the journal like a pressed leaf. Proof was not necessary. Proof was a courtesy for people whose imaginations had become too tidy. The question of what to do about the world's version of Elizabeth's death remained like a house guest who stayed just a little too long for the welcome to hold. Amara considered the police, the papers, the court of public opinion which ate truth and called it content. She took the question to the terrace at dusk, where the ivy, unbothered by scandal, climbed whatever it could reach. Mrs. Green found her there and sat without asking. "Some evenings," she said, "this house feels almost human. Tired. You... No? Like it wants to apologize." "I've been thinking about telling," Amara said. "About making it all official. The argument, the fall. About refusing to let the story stay the way Money wrote it." Mrs. Green nodded slowly. "If you do, I'll stand behind you. I can balance a tray and a truth at the same time." She looked at the sky, which was writing its own pink script across the clouds. "But ask yourself what you want that telling to do. Punish, cleanse, teach. Grief can be very good at dressing itself as justice." "I don't want to punish him," Amara said, surprised at the clarity. "Not because he doesn't deserve consequences, but because I don't want my mother's love to become a hammer. I want it to be a lantern." "Then carry it like one," Mrs. Green said. "Light what you can. The rest, you'll have to leave to people who come after you with matches." It was not that Amara decided to forgive Charles Whitmore. It was that she decided not to curate his punishment. She told him so, standing in the doorway of his study where the afternoon made a halo of dust above his desk. "I am not letting it go," she said. "I am letting it be what it is. Your guilt does not need an audience to be real. But Elizabeth's life does. My mother's does." He bowed his head, the gesture of a man at last acknowledging a service he had never attended. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Access," she said. "To the rooms that held her, to the boxes that hid her, to the money that can fund a scholarship in her name for girls who will not have to choose between love and shelter." She waited. "And your word that you will not stop it." He gave it. He did more than that. He wrote checks and, more costly, for a man like him, letters. He called the museum that had hosted Elizabeth's favorite artist and endowed a lecture series in her name, the first of which would be on how love rearranges space. He stood in front of his staff and said what he should have said to the world long ago. "I did not know how to honor my wife when she was alive. I am learning how now." Months later, on a warm evening that made bees drunk in the garden, the house opened itself to people who had never been invited before. The East Terrace, once the stage of secrecy, held chairs and a small podium. On it, a photograph, restored, framed, unashamed. Two women side by side, one with a scarf, one in a pale dress, both looking at the camera as if to say, "We know you have been waiting." Amara stood before them and told a story that belonged to her, and did not. She spoke of the quiet, the kneeling in a library to retrieve the past from a seam in a drawer, the journal that smelled faintly of perfume and rain, the conversation with a man whose power had not saved him from being small and who was trying now to be less small. She spoke of her mother's hands. She ended with the 4 words written in pencil, "For when it's safe." "It isn't safe," she said, her voice familiar to her in this register of truth. "But it is ours." A breeze lifted the scarf of a woman in the front row and carried the scent of forget-me-nots across the terrace. For a moment, Amara felt Evelyn step up beside her, adjusting the microphone the way she used to adjust collars. Gentle, sure. She felt Elizabeth's laugh catch in the ivy and run along the balustrade like light. When the guests had gone and the house had eaten their footsteps, Amara walked the hallway alone. The portraits seemed to have softened, as if oil paint could reconsider. She paused before the portrait of Elizabeth, high and grand, and imagined another portrait beside it, smaller, intimate, a woman at a sewing machine looking up as if she had heard her name and liked the sound of it. "Good night." "Mama," she said, and the word mama traveled as easily as breath. "I found the end and pulled." In her room, she set the journal on the table and opened to the page where a spilled rain had made the ink bloom. She ran her finger along the sentences as if they were seams. She did not think of closure. She thought of opening. Outside, the house exhaled. Somewhere in its bones, a stare answered with a soft complaint. The garden readied itself for morning. The photograph, no longer forgotten, held steady on the wall downstairs. 2 women, keeping each other in place, not with force, but with a shared gravity. Amara lay down and closed her eyes. When sleep came, it came like a door that, for once, did not require a key.